You're listening to Thrive, your agency resource, the only podcast of its kind for creative, media, and technology leaders who are ready to dive deeper into consciousness, leadership, and agency growth. I'm your host, Kelly Campbell. This year, Thrive is brought to you by E2M Solutions, a trusted white label partner to hundreds of digital agencies across the globe. Visit e2msolutions.com/thrive today. Welcome back to another episode of Thrive. We are living in a time of significant challenges on individual, organizational, and societal levels. So in order for us as agency leaders to meet these challenges, a shift in consciousness is needed in order to do business in a way that supports people and planet and profit on equal plane. Today, I'm joined by Martin Palethorpe, founder of Unbounded and co-founder with Gina Hayden, who's also been on our show before, of consciousleaders.earth. And that's the website that you can check out if you're interested in finding a little bit more about what they do. Martin has over 20 years of experience as an executive and leadership coach, and he specializes in transformation mindset development for leaders and their teams. Martin, thank you so much for joining me today. You know that I am extremely excited for this conversation because it's everything to me, and I know it's everything to you. So thank you for being here.
Wonderful. I'm excited. Thank you, Kelly.
So as we were chatting a little bit before we hit record, we were talking about the fact that conscious leadership today might mean something a little bit different than it did, at the point of inception from John Mackey in his book of work with Conscious Capitalism. So for you on a personal level and really doing this work in the world, what does conscious leadership mean to you?
Conscious leadership, I really sort of look at the two words individually and then put them together. And I think so there's being conscious, being aware, and there's being aware and conscious on multiple levels. There's being conscious and aware of how I'm coming across. There's conscious and aware of how others are in a meeting. There's conscious of my actions and the impact they have on others. There's conscious of the strategies in my business and how they affect others and the planet. And then the deeper levels of conscious are being conscious of who I am and how I'm thinking, and the role and the grip that my ego has on how I'm showing up, and the conditioning that I developed as a younger child and how that's gripping me into who I become today. And so for me, the conscious word, there's so many elements to being awake and aware, and then that impacts my leadership. And so the more conscious I become, the more I can lead. I can lead then my own life. I can lead myself in my relationships with my family and my friends and how I live and what I do. But of course, also my leadership in a business, in an agency, in the world.
I like that you sort of put consciousness and awareness as sort of the hub of a wheel, let's call it, the hub of a bicycle wheel, and all of the spokes, of what this impacts and what this influences, sort of going inward and outward, how there's so much interplay, so I think it's been difficult for some people to wrap their heads around what do we mean by conscious leadership and being aware, self-aware, aware of our own actions, being empathetic to other people, kind of looking more holistically at the business and its impacts on the community or the environment or the people that are under our stewardship. There's a lot to unpack with conscious leadership. So I think it makes all the sense in the world that it would evolve, from its days of inception.
Yes, I agree with that. And I think the thing that occurs to me as you're speaking is that it's dynamic and it's in every moment. Mm-hmm. So it's not something we attain. We don't become a conscious leader and like a badge. It's a constant lifelong journey of, am I aware in this moment? Am I present? Am I gripped by this or that? And then, so for me, it's a dynamic moment by moment experience.
Yeah, I like that, the sort of the demarcation there about, it's not a becoming. I often talk about it as a practice. Some people call conscious leadership a style of leadership, but I actually don't subscribe to that. I think it's more of a practice because it sort of goes to what you're talking about here, that it's it's a moment by moment choice in a way, or just a
Mm.
way of being. When it comes to agencies, I think that there's an interesting conversation around agencies who are leading in a way or practicing conscious leadership, right? Are they following their clients' leads or demands, or are they the ones leading the clients in terms of the campaigns that they're putting out, in the work that's being, put out into the world, how something's being marketed? I think this is a really interesting discussion.
Yes, very, very interesting. And I think we've spent many years with the ethos of let's be client led. Let's serve the needs of our client. Let's understand them well. Let's connect with them well, and let's provide them solutions that will really help their needs. Now, I think that's wonderful and beautiful. And yet, being a stand for what we believe in this world and how we want to lead, the work that we want to do, where does that fit in? And I think on my own personal journey of becoming more conscious, I start to have stronger boundaries and clearer desires of what do I stand for, and what do I want to tolerate or not tolerate? And what kind of work do I really want to do in this world? And so I think it's an interesting conundrum of how do we balance the two? Because also on the client needs side, sometimes we might need the revenue to keep, to be healthy as a business.
Mhm.
Yet, of course, I also experience agencies out there who are simply a stand for working with, aligned with their values, and they seem to have grown a healthy business that way.
Yeah, it's very fascinating because I work with agencies sort of across the board in terms of that spectrum. And the ones who I feel like have really strong positioning that is values influenced or values derived. So, this is who we are in the world. These are the types of clients that we want to work with. They have to, have some kind of social impact mission. They can't exist just purely to make money. They have to value diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, accessibility. They have to be empathetic. They have to be clients that are not going to treat us poorly, not going to treat us as a vendor, the V word, but more as a partner. These are all things that we talk about. And when I see an agency or agency leaders abandoning those values in order to get a client, the relationship just never works out really well, right? They might provide the deliverable, but the relationship and maybe even the impact or the results that are achieved are not nearly as great as if the two partners were values aligned. So, strong positioning in terms of the values alignment, what I might call conscious leadership, I think that's really important. But it sort of goes back to what we're sort of talking about here initially, which is, do we let the client lead, or do we lead the client? And I think, it's not a hard and fast answer, which is why it's difficult. Sometimes it's we lead them, and sometimes it's they lead us. And I think that we just have to, as you said, be really clear about who we are and what we stand for and what we will accept or tolerate or not.
Yes. And I love what you said is that there's no right answer, but are we doing it consciously, or are we doing it out of fear or insecurity or worried about, what a client might say or think, or are we doing it from a place of strength and clarity?
You just said the word fear. This is very interesting. So, what role do you think fear plays in an agency or agency leaders leaning into conscious leadership or dabbling in it?
Oh, goodness, I think it's massive. If we unpack our fears, and a lot of our fears are stories that our mind has made over years. So we have a fear about money, and it might not be rational. It might be just the way that we grew up in the household and the conditioning that we grew up with and that we picked up from society. So I've got a fear about losing work, or I've got a fear about not having enough to pay the bills at the end of the month, or I've got a fear about looking silly or not looking like a strong leader. I think fear shows up in many ways if we're not careful and can drive our behaviors. And I think that's a significant part of the conscious leadership journey, is to reveal and expose and explore these fears, the rational ones, but also the irrational ones.
So if that's the case, if diving into our own fears is part of that journey, it's part of the through line throughout our entire practice of conscious leadership, what role does inner work, inner childhood trauma healing, all of the things that when we talk about unpacking and doing the work, a lot of people don't understand what that means or where to start. What is the correlation between those two things?
Oh, it's an awesome question. We think at Conscious Leaders Earth, we say it's at least 70% of the work. The inner exploration, the inner understanding, to understand the mind, to release the grip of the ego or the conditioned self or the traumas that we grew up with. The more we understand self, the more we can lead from a place of clarity, kindness, calm, considered approach, a place of authenticity and a place of strength. So for us, like, the 30% is then what we do in the world, but really it's at least the 70% that is the inner game.
Yeah. What's interesting to me about your 70% is if we go back to ACEs, right? Like adverse childhood experiences, 70% of us, I think it's actually higher, but according to the ACEs, 70% of us have been on the receiving end of these adverse childhood experiences, which means that we have developed big T trauma. We've talked about big T versus small t trauma on the show before, so I don't want to necessarily dive into that. But I think the 70% is kind of interesting, right? Because if that is about the number of people who are experiencing these things, and you think that 70% of conscious leadership is about unraveling, unpacking that grip that you call it, I find that fascinating.
Yeah. And I agree with you, it's at least 70%, if not 100%. Because even if we didn't experience significant trauma as a child, our child had some impact on, it created the way that we are and the conditioning and what we think is normal. And so there's so much juice in that, in unpacking it and releasing from it to enable us to become the leader we want to become.
Yeah. Hey, let's take a quick break. Did you know that there's a better way to scale your agency? Whether it's web design, development, e-commerce, content, SEO, or even hosting, E2M is the reliable white label partner you wish you knew about years ago. Personally, I'm proud to partner with E2M because of our alignment in values and ethics. Head over to e2msolutions.com/thrive to learn more. Now, let's get back to the show. So, speaking about becoming, I know that we don't talk about conscious leadership as a becoming. We think about it as maybe an emergence or a practice or something like that. It's not something that you become. It's not a light switch that you switch on one day. But how do agency leaders in particular, how do they step into this more fully than they are today? If this is really something that feels quite foreign to them now, or they're curious, which means that they're being pulled on some soul level, what do they do next? How do they start?
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's a big question.
It's a massive question because it's obviously a lifelong journey. And I guess if we're saying 70% of it's an inner game, then what are they doing to explore and learn about that? I mean, are they, and I could name a zillion things here, like are they doing 360 feedback so they get to understand who they are and how they're coming across? Are they exploring their inner game? Are they doing some spiritual exploration or some mind exploration? Are they meditating? Are they exploring some Buddhism or some non-duality? Or are they having some therapy? I guess there's a multitude of places they could go to just explore the inner game to help them have more awareness to influence how they then show up.
Yeah. So would you say, since there seems to be a myriad of places where you could sort of step foot on the path, would you say that it's fair to sort of say that it's whatever of all these different things. You said you could name a zillion. I could probably also add another zillion, right? But out of all of these different options that are available, do you think that it makes the most sense to start with the thing that feels the most resonant or the easiest entrance to someone?
Yes, and I think this is part of there's somehow linked into the conscious leader journey is, my sort of understanding is the serendipity of life, and the universe is almost providing us what we need next.
If we're open
And
to it.
if we're open to that. So it's like where we go is like, are we open? Are we present? Are we aware of what's happening and what the signals are? Are we ready to learn from it if it's a big conflict at work? Are we frustrated by the conflict, or are we looking for the lessons and the learning that we could have? And I think that's the same with what development path we choose, which is, my development every year is basically, it just kind of shows up, and it's like what gravitates towards me, and or what's calling me, what's resonating for me.
Mhm.
And yes, I think that's very much the individual's journey.
Yeah. What are some of the examples, or what are some of the things that people might be experiencing as, let's say, an agency leader that would signal to you that they might need to work on that inner game, as you call it?
So I guess a classic one might be engagement, like, staff engagement, or there's, a significant number of leavers from the business. Those are classic ones. And I'm not suggesting it's all because of the leader,
Yeah.
but the way I see it is that there's always an opportunity for us to look inside and say, what role did I play in this?
Yeah.
Can I be responsible for? What can I look at and what can I learn? And it's very easy for us to look outside of ourselves and look at other people. But if for example, employee engagement were really low, that's a beautiful opportunity to say, well, what culture am I creating? What am I doing or not doing that's having engagement be low, for example?
I would build on that to say not just low engagement, but if you have a significant number of your team members who are feeling really stressed out, really overwhelmed, right? Feeling like they are at beyond capacity, that could also be a marker or a signal.
Yeah.
There are many of these. So those are external, right? Those are external markers, external signals. Can you give an example of something that might be an internal marker
Yes.
for a leader?
Well, and I love your questions. Can I just respond to the well-being one
Yeah,
just quickly
please.
before I answer that?
Please.
So I see this a lot where we as an agency support well-being, and yet, so we've got the free yoga or the free meditation class, or we've got the counselor that we provide to support people. So we're putting some practical things in place, yet there's an issue with well-being. And it may well come down to the leader's own relationship to that topic, is
Say,
because
say
perhaps
more about that, because I have a couple of clients that are in that scenario.
they grew up with a mindset of, I must work hard, I'm strong, I'm resilient, I must work hard, I will make this happen at all costs, something like that. And that's a deep-rooted programming
Mhm.
that then will influence the well-being in the organization in some way.
Yeah. I'm smiling not because it's funny, but because it's so true, right? So I think sometimes we have this leadership dilemma where, yes, we're so driven. Yes, our name is on the door. It's our reputation. And we've had to drive and be resilient based on our upbringing. Yet we want to be conscious leaders. We want to support the folks who are under our stewardship. And so we have all the well-being mechanisms in place. But what we're signaling to the people who we lead is that I might say well-being is a value of the organization, but because I don't act that way, I don't subscribe to that, I don't set the example, what we're signaling is that you shouldn't either.
Yeah.
And it's totally subconscious or unconscious. None of this is conscious. We know that. but it really, really impacts the organization and certainly the culture. And then eventually, as a lagging indicator, it's going to be, as you said before, the people who leave the organization, and it will also impact the bottom line at some point. It may not happen immediately because humans are pretty resilient and they can deal with a lot. So it's going to take a little bit longer for them to really burn out, but that's not what we want to be doing. So let's go
Yeah.
back to the internal signals.
So the way I see it is that we have this incredible internal awareness when we tune into it. When our mind goes quiet and we have the time and the space to reflect on things, this internal intelligence helps us work out what the issues are in our lives and in our work. And so I think because most people are so busy, they miss reading the signals inside them. I mean, the classic easy one is they're working and living unsustainably. They don't look after their health, or they don't look after their nutrition or their health, or they don't have time and space to be in nature or to do exercise or to do their hobbies. And so the internal radar is they're experiencing that some way. They're experiencing that in tiredness or stress or overwhelm, but they learned, as many of us did, what I did in my early years, just to push through. And so they're not tuning into the signals of themselves. And that will be one example. And then I think a more practical example in the business is I know deep down whether I dealt with somebody well or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I might be able to justify to myself that I did what needed to be done. Yeah, I was challenging of him and that needed to happen and he left and so be it. But then there's tuning into this deeper intelligence, I think, where did I do that from kindness? Did I tune into him? Did I listen? And I think there's intelligence inside us to help us guide in all situations.
That's really beautiful the way that you said it. And again, that comes back to the self-awareness, right? I like that you talk about it as inner intelligence. I think, when we look at the intelligence of design of nature or intelligence in nature or in plants or in, things like this, there's this through line. And I know this sounds a little esoteric, but it feels like there's a very clear through line that if we just listen, if we're open, if we tap in, there's a tremendous amount of information available to us. And I think that we've discarded that because it can't possibly be true that we have all of this information available to us, right? We have to seek externally. So I like that we're kind of winding down and talking about the intuitive, more, I mean, yeah, it's inner game, but it's really wisdom, inner
Yeah.
wisdom that we have. We know what the right thing to do is. We know what the right way is. We know what integrity feels like. We know what it feels like in our
Yes.
body when we're not in integrity, right?
Yeah, I love it. And I love your reference to nature because it's like, how does the bird work out when to eat or when to migrate to the other side of the planet? How does it do that? There's this beautiful, magical, unexplainable intelligence that's going on around us
Yeah.
that's had this planet grow and become what it's become. And we have access to that intelligence too.
Yeah. I find this, it's staying on the nature reference for a minute. I've just planted my entire vegetable garden last weekend. And so already there are little tiny seedlings that are about an inch tall popping out of the ground, about an inch away from each other. The string beans and the sugar snap peas and the carrots. And it's like I planted a seed that was minuscule. I could barely see it in my hand. And all of a sudden now these things are the intelligence inside of plants and nature is endlessly fascinating to me. And it's a
Mm,
great reminder looking out every morning when I go outside and look at the garden to see what that little bit of growth has been. It's endlessly fascinating to me to correlate the inner wisdom and inner intelligence of those plants, to what's inside of me. And I think the more that we can, I almost apologized and call it like esoteric, but I think the less that we apologize for that and the more normal we make that. And maybe this is the shift in the conversation for me, which I appreciate you for holding space for. It's not esoteric. It's not abnormal. It's not woo-woo. This is actually much more natural than anything else that we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, love it. I feel a calling to go in a couple of directions. So nature is, no, you're right, is not esoteric, but also the wisdom inside us is not esoteric if we tune into it. What is that? That's an intelligence that isn't our rational mind. And obviously what we've done that we think is normal and right is to use our rational brain.
Right.
So we break everything down. We try to be logical. We try to do everything through data, and we read what someone else did. So we think that we can just employ that. And there's too much use of the rational mind in this world, even in creative agencies.
Yeah.
And obviously creative agencies, the whole concept of creation, being creative, comes not from the rational mind, but from the intuitive mind that is the gift.
Right.
And so wisdom also, and intelligence and intuition comes from this creative, unexplainable, magical mind. Might be esoteric, but you know what? It's actually where the power happens.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I think all of this is, again, self-awareness, inner game, intuition, intelligence, all of that. That's where the magic happens. That's where we have so much power, almost to the point where it's like our power center. So yeah, I don't know. I guess we're sort of correlating conscious leadership and being a power center, or a center for our intelligent power. I don't know. It's I could wax poetic and talk about this all day with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Here.
As we kind of wrap up here, what would be your sort of mic drop moment? What is the wisdom, if we were looking externally, what is the wisdom that you would impart on someone who is just opening up to this work for the first time?
Oh, I feel like saying something bold and controversial.
Yes, please do.
What you do in life is irrelevant. How big your agency gets, it's irrelevant. The only thing that really matters is your inner journey to explore and learn about yourself, so you live with more peace of mind, more clarity, more kindness, more responsibility, more authenticity. It's all about who you're going to be in this world. That's where the fulfillment comes from. But also that's where the conscious leadership really happens. So turn inside.
Martin, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a lovely conversation.
Thank you, Kelly. It's been awesome. Loved it.
And thank you for joining us. If you liked this episode, please rate the show or subscribe wherever you watch or listen. And a big thank you to the official sponsor of Thrive for this year, E2M Solutions, your white label agency partner. Learn more about their approach, services, and subscription plans at e2msolutions.com/thrive.